Welcome to the Life Paradox, where reality is stranger than fiction. Morgan sat at the kitchen table, fingers tracing the rim of her coffee mug, watching steam spiral into the air between them. Across from her, Daniel organized papers with methodical precision: bank statements, account summaries, and a spreadsheet. He'd spent all weekend preparing. His wedding band caught the morning light as he aligned the corners of the documents. "I've been thinking about this for a while," Daniel said without looking up. "Our approach to money isn't working anymore." Morgan's stomach tightened. 12 years of marriage had taught her to recognize the careful neutrality in his tone, the voice he used when he'd already made a decision. She recalled their early days, sitting on the floor of their first apartment, sorting bills and dreaming about their future together. "With everything that's happened, I think it makes sense for our finances to be separate moving forward," he continued, sliding a document toward her. "I've outlined how we can split the bills proportionally based on our incomes." Morgan stared at the numbers. She thought about the past 3 years, her mother's illness, quitting her executive position to care for her, the depleted savings, and her recent return to work at a fraction of her former salary. The careful life they'd built together, now, reduced to columns and calculations. "This way is more equitable," Daniel explained. "I'll manage my investments and retirement separately. You'll need to catch up on yours, of course." Every paradox begins with a question. If you love unraveling life's biggest mysteries, hit subscribe and join the Life Paradox, where every story bends reality. Morgan remembered the vows they'd written, together, for richer or poorer, and how Daniel had squeezed her hand when they'd said those words. Now he was speaking about equity and proportional contributions, as though their marriage was a business arrangement that needed restructuring. "I've already set up your new account," Daniel said, pushing a bank card across the table. "I transferred your portion of this month's expenses. I think you'll find the arrangement fair." Morgan picked up the card, feeling its weight, lighter somehow than she expected. She thought about the nights she'd held her mother's hand in the hospital while Daniel worked late, the promotions he'd earned while she put her career on hold, and the unspoken agreement that they were building something together. "Okay," she said quietly. Daniel looked up, momentarily caught off guard by her simple response. He'd prepared counter-arguments for protests that didn't come. "That's it? Just, okay?" he asked. Morgan nodded, sliding the bank card into her wallet. "If this is what you want, then okay." For the first time that morning, Daniel looked directly at her, confusion crossing his features. He'd expected tears, arguments, a discussion about their shared dreams. Instead, he found himself facing a woman whose expression he suddenly couldn't read. "I have some errands to run," Morgan said, rising from the table. "I'll take care of the groceries this week. Text me if you need anything specific." As she grabbed her keys and walked toward the door, Daniel sat motionless, staring at the space she had occupied. Something in her quiet acceptance left him more unsettled than any argument could have. He didn't know it yet, but that simple, "okay," was about to change everything. That evening, while Daniel worked late again, Morgan sat cross-legged on their bedroom floor, surrounded by 12 years of financial records. Bank statements, tax returns, investment portfolios, the paper trail of their life together. She'd always trusted Daniel with their finances. He was the analytical one, after all, with his business degree and spreadsheet enthusiasm. She had been the visionary, the one who saw possibilities and brought creative energy to their partnership. But now, bathed in the soft glow of her desk lamp, Morgan began to understand the true picture. With methodical patience, she traced their financial journey together, noting how her income had matched his in the early years. She remembered their agreement. Her career would take priority for 5 years, then his for the next 5. They would build their wealth together, as a team. That plan had worked beautifully until her mother's diagnosis. Morgan's fingers trembled, slightly as she found the email thread from 3 years ago. Daniel's reluctant agreement to her sabbatical, his concerns about their financial future, her assurances that their savings could weather the storm. She had never imagined her mother's illness would stretch from months into years. Then she found it, the investment statements from 2 years ago. While she spent nights at the hospital and days navigating the healthcare system, Daniel had been quietly moving funds, not small adjustments, but massive transfers from their joint accounts into positions solely in his name. The dates aligned perfectly with her mother's decline and her own absence from their financial discussions. Morgan's breath caught as she calculated the totals. Nearly 70% of their shared assets had been systematically transferred. Her retirement account showed minimal growth, while his had tripled. The "our money" they had always discussed had steadily become his money during her family crisis. She stared at the panoramic city view from their bedroom window, remembering how excited they'd been to afford this apartment. Morgan had helped negotiate the purchase price, using skills from her executive role. The down payment had come largely from her bonus that year, yet the mortgage refinancing paperwork from last year showed only Daniel's name. Morgan's phone chimed with a text from her friend Leanne. "How did the conversation go? Are you okay?" Morgan had confided in Leanne yesterday about Daniel's sudden announcement. Leanne, a financial advisor, had looked concerned and suggested Morgan review their financial history before agreeing to any new arrangement. "I'm still processing," Morgan texted back, unable to fully articulate the revelation unfolding before her. She took a deep breath and continued her analysis, creating a timeline that correlated with their major life events. Each milestone revealed a pattern she'd been too trusting to see. Daniel had systematically secured his financial future, while leaving hers vulnerable during her time of greatest personal sacrifice. As midnight approached, Morgan heard Daniel's key in the lock. She gathered the documents, tucking them into a portfolio she slid beneath their bed. When he entered the bedroom, she pretended to be asleep, her mind racing with questions she wasn't ready to ask. Daniel paused in the doorway, watching her for a moment before heading to the bathroom. Morgan remained perfectly still, eyes closed, feeling as though she were lying next to a stranger. Tomorrow, she would need to make a decision about who she was in this marriage, and whether the partnership she believed in had ever truly existed. For the next 2 weeks, Morgan moved through life with outward calm and inner purpose. She did not confront Daniel about her discoveries. Instead, she embraced his new financial arrangement with apparent acceptance that left him increasingly perplexed. Each morning, she smiled and made coffee, discussing everyday matters as if nothing fundamental had changed between them. But everything had changed in how Morgan perceived their relationship. When Daniel worked late, she no longer waited up with dinner kept warm. She took evening classes in financial management, telling him they were yoga sessions to help with stress. During lunch breaks, she met with Leanne to develop a comprehensive understanding of their financial entanglements. "He's been planning this for years," Leanne said during one of their meetings, reviewing the documents Morgan had gathered. "This wasn't a sudden decision." Morgan nodded, twisting her wedding ring. "The question is why? We always talked about being partners in everything." "Partners don't secretly divert assets," Leanne replied gently. "Have you noticed anything else changing in your relationship?" Morgan considered the question. There had been subtle shifts, Daniel taking more business trips, guarding his phone more carefully, becoming distant when she talked about rebuilding her career. Nothing concrete enough to accuse him of anything specific, but together, these changes formed a troubling pattern. "I need to understand exactly where we stand before I decide what to do," Morgan said. She began methodically documenting their contributions to their shared life. She had sacrificed 3 years of career advancement and income to care for her mother. That sacrifice had monetary value. She had contributed ideas, connections, and support that had directly benefited Daniel's career advancement. Those contributions had value too. At home, Morgan maintained the charade. She prepared separate grocery lists and divided household expenses according to Daniel's proportional system. She spoke enthusiastically about her new part-time job at a marketing firm, not mentioning the interviews she was quietly taking for executive positions or the career coach she had hired. Daniel seemed simultaneously relieved by her cooperation and unsettled by it. One evening, as they ate separately prepared meals at opposite ends of the dining table, he broached the subject. "You seem different lately," he observed, studying her. "More independent." Morgan smiled. "Isn't that what you wanted?" "Separate. Finances mean separate decisions. I meant financially independent, not—" He trailed off, unable to articulate what bothered him about her calm acceptance. "Did you expect me to fall apart?" Morgan asked, keeping her tone light. Daniel set down his fork. "I expected you to fight for our old system." Morgan maintained eye contact. "You made it clear that system doesn't work for you anymore." "That doesn't mean I don't want us to work," Daniel said, frowning. Morgan nodded thoughtfully. "Then perhaps we need to redefine what us means." The conversation shifted to safer topics, but Morgan noticed Daniel watching her more closely afterward. He began suggesting weekend activities together, things they hadn't done since before her mother's illness. Morgan participated pleasantly, but maintained emotional distance, building a wall of politeness that matched the financial wall he had constructed. Meanwhile, she quietly met with an attorney to understand her rights and options. She wasn't planning to leave, not yet, but knowledge was power, and Morgan was determined never to be blindsided again. The woman who had quietly said okay 2 weeks ago was systematically reclaiming her agency, one careful step at a time, She closed her newly created investment account after making her first independent deposit. Morgan realized something important. Her worth wasn't defined by Daniel's spreadsheets, and soon he would discover exactly what that meant. On a rainy Tuesday morning, Morgan's phone rang while she was reviewing resumes for her department. The caller ID showed her former boss's name, Claire Winters, now CEO of a major marketing firm. "Morgan, I've been thinking about you," Claire said after pleasantries. "Are you ready to get back in the game? I mean, really back." Morgan stepped away from her desk, heart racing. "What did you have in mind?" "I need someone to head our new international division. Based in London initially, then expanding to Singapore next year. It's executive level with equity options." Claire named a salary figure that made Morgan grip her phone tighter. "I need someone who can build teams from the ground up. Someone who sees the big picture." "Like I used to do," Morgan said softly. "Like no one has done since you left," Claire corrected. "I know you stepped away for family reasons, but I always held out hope you'd return." Morgan glanced at the framed photo on her desk, herself and Daniel on their honeymoon, grinning at the camera from a Parisian cafe. They had been equals then, excited about building their life together. She remembered their conversations about international opportunities, how they had promised to support each other's career jumps, even if it meant temporary separation. Those conversations felt like they belonged to different people now. Would you need an answer?" Morgan asked. "The board meets Friday. I'd like to present you as my recommendation." Morgan thanked Claire and promised to call back the next day. That evening, she prepared Daniel's favorite meal, herb-crusted salmon with roasted vegetables, and opened a bottle of wine they'd been saving for a special occasion. Daniel looked surprised when he arrived home to find the dining table set with candles. "What's the celebration?" "I received a job offer today," Morgan said, pouring the wine. "Executive position, international division." Daniel's smile faltered slightly. "International? Where?" "London initially, with frequent travel to Asia." Morgan watched his expression carefully. "The compensation package is exceptional. Almost triple what I'm making now, plus equity." Daniel set his wine glass down. That's impressive. But London? We've built our life here. Morgan tilted her head. Actually, I've been thinking about what you said about equitable contributions. This would certainly change the proportion of our financial responsibilities. This isn't about money, Daniel said, tension evident in his voice. Isn't it? Morgan asked quietly. You separated our finances because my earning potential changed. This opportunity would restore the balance. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. A marriage isn't just about balance sheets. I agree, Morgan said, meeting his gaze steadily. Which is why your decision to separate our finances during my hardest time was so illuminating. The silence between them stretched, heavy with unspoken accusations. Daniel looked away first. How long have you been searching for positions like this? I wasn't searching, Morgan replied honestly. Claire called me, but I've been preparing to rebuild my career since the day you pushed that bank card across the table. Daniel's face flushed. I was trying to protect us financially after 3 years of instability. No, Morgan said calmly. You were protecting yourself. I've seen the account transfers, Daniel. I know exactly when and how our joint assets became your personal safety net. Daniel's expression shifted from defensive to shocked. You've been investigating me? I've been investigating us, Morgan corrected. Something I should have done. Years ago. Daniel stared at his plate, appetite gone. What are you saying? That you're taking this job and moving to London? Morgan took a sip of wine, allowing the moment to breathe. I'm saying I have options now. Just like you created options for yourself while I was caring for my mother. As rain streaked down their living room windows, they sat in silence, the carefully prepared meal growing cold between them. The distance separating them had nothing to do with geography, and everything to do with trust shattered and priorities revealed. The question hanging in the air remained unspoken. Was there anything left worth salvaging? 3 days later, Morgan sat across from Daniel in their living room, a thick folder resting on the coffee table between them. Outside, the city lights twinkled as dusk descended, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors where they had once danced after purchasing this apartment. I've accepted the position, Morgan said, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. I start in London next month. Daniel's jaw tightened. He'd been unusually quiet since their dinner revelation, alternating between defensive distance and attempts at rekindling closeness that felt calculated rather than genuine. Without discussing it with me first? He asked. Like you discussed separating our finances? Morgan countered. Or moving 70% of our joint assets into accounts under only your name while I was at the hospital with my mother? Daniel flinched. That's not fair. I was ensuring our financial stability. Your financial stability, Morgan corrected, opening the folder. She removed a stack of highlighted documents, transfers, investment statements, account openings, all meticulously organized by date. 3 weeks after my mother's diagnosis, you moved our emergency fund. 6 months later, you liquidated our shared investment portfolio and reopened it in your name only. Daniel stared at the evidence before him. You weren't interested in our finances then. You were focused on your mother. I was focused on our family, Morgan said, her voice cracking slightly. I thought you were too. She placed another document on the table, their original financial plan, created during their first year of marriage, with both signatures at the bottom. We agreed to build wealth together, to support each other through career fluctuations. When did that change for you? Daniel leaned back, crossing his arms. When I realized I was carrying the entire financial burden alone. When I saw our savings dwindling while you had no concrete plan to return to work. My mother was dying, Morgan said quietly. And our future was dying with her, Daniel snapped, then immediately looked regretful. That came out wrong. No, Morgan said. I think it came out exactly right. You saw my sacrifice as a threat to your security rather than as something we were facing together. Daniel's expression hardened. You're making me the villain because I was practical when you were emotional. Morgan shook her head. No, I'm recognizing that when faced with a challenge, you chose self-preservation over partnership. You created an escape hatch while I was too distracted to notice. She slid another document across the table, a printout of a text message thread between Daniel and someone named Lisa discussing property viewings. The date coincided with the worst period of her mother's illness. Were you planning to leave? Morgan asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel's face paled. I was exploring options. I never acted on them. Because my mother died sooner than expected, Morgan said, and I returned to work faster than you anticipated. The silence between them stretched, filled with years of unspoken resentments and diverging priorities. Finally, Daniel spoke. What do you want, Morgan? Revenge? To punish me by moving to London? Morgan considered the question carefully. What I want is to understand when we stopped being a team. When for better or worse became for better, until it requires real sacrifice. She reached for a pen and drew a line down the middle of a blank sheet of paper. You wanted separate finances. Let's be completely transparent about what that means. For the next hour, they dissected their marriage with brutal honesty, not just finances, but emotional investments, sacrifices made and acknowledged, dreams supported or abandoned. As the list grew longer, the fundamental asymmetry of their recent years together became undeniable. When they finished, Morgan capped the pen and looked at Daniel, seeing him clearly perhaps for the first time in years. London isn't about punishing you. It's about choosing myself after years of putting everyone else first. Daniel stared at the divided paper, the physical manifestation of their fractured partnership. And us? Is there still an us in this scenario? Morgan's answer hung in the balance as night fully descended on the city beyond their windows. The question wasn't whether she would go to London, but whether anything of their marriage remained worth saving. 1 week before her departure date, Morgan stood in their bedroom surrounded by open suitcases. She had rented a furnished apartment in London for 6 months, long enough to establish herself in the new position, but not so long as to preclude a return. The ambiguity of this arrangement mirrored the unresolved state of their marriage. Since their confrontation, she and Daniel had existed in a strange limbo. They shared their living space, but little else. He had been working later, coming home after she was asleep and leaving before she woke. The few times they did interact, conversation remained superficial. Discussions about mail or household maintenance, devoid of any mention of London or their future. Morgan folded another sweater, remembering when Daniel had given it to her 3 Christmases ago. The weight of memories in every object made packing a form of emotional archaeology, excavating layers of their relationship with each item she chose to take or leave behind. The sound of the front door opening interrupted her thoughts. She checked. Her watch, early afternoon on a Wednesday. Daniel should have been at work. He appeared in the bedroom doorway looking uncharacteristically disheveled. His tie was loosened and he carried his suit jacket over one arm. I thought you'd be at the office, Morgan said, continuing to fold clothes. I left early, Daniel replied, his eyes moving from her face to the suitcases. It's real then. You're really going. Morgan nodded. My flight is next Tuesday. Daniel stepped into the room, setting his jacket on the chair. I've been doing a lot of thinking. So have I, Morgan said. Can we talk? Really talk? He asked, gesturing toward the living room. They sat on opposite ends of the sofa where they had once spent Sunday mornings reading together, legs intertwined. Now, the distance between them seemed symbolic. Daniel spoke first. I met with a therapist yesterday and the day before. Morgan looked up, surprised. Daniel had always dismissed therapy as paying someone to tell you what you already know. I needed an objective perspective, he continued. I've been trying to understand why I did what I did with our finances. Morgan set aside the sweater she'd been folding. And fear, Daniel said simply. When your mother got sick and you stepped away from your career, something in me panicked. I'd always seen us as equals, both contributing, both succeeding. When that changed, I couldn't handle the pressure of being solely responsible for our financial welfare. Morgan considered his words. So you created a safety net for yourself? Yes, Daniel admitted. But it wasn't just about the money. When you were focused on your mother, I felt replaceable. Like you didn't need me anymore. I needed you more than ever, Morgan said softly. I know that now, Daniel replied, his voice thick with emotion. But instead of supporting you, I withdrew. I created distance to protect myself from the pain of watching you suffer and feeling helpless to fix it. Morgan felt tears threatening. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because I was ashamed, Daniel said. It's easier to talk about equity and financial responsibility than to admit you're terrified of losing the person you love. Not to death, but to circumstances beyond your control. They sat in silence for several moments, the afternoon light shifting around them. What about London? Daniel finally asked. It's an incredible opportunity, Morgan said. One I've earned. Daniel nodded slowly. I know. And I want to support that. Truly. He took a deep breath. I've requested a transfer to our London office. It would be a lateral move, not a promotion, but they have an opening. Morgan stared at him. You would move to London? If you'll let me, Daniel said. Not right away. It would take a few months to arrange. But yes. Morgan felt a complicated mix of emotions. Why? After everything that's happened, why would you uproot your life? Because I want a second chance at being the partner I promised to be, Daniel said. Not the one who runs when things get hard. Morgan looked away, her gaze falling on the half-packed suitcases visible through the bedroom door. I'm not sure we can go back to what we were. I don't want to go back, Daniel said. I want us to go forward, differently, more honestly. He reached into his pocket and removed a folded document, placing it on the coffee table between them. Morgan recognized it immediately, their joint account statement, the one he had closed when separating their finances. I reopened it, he said. I've transferred back everything I moved plus the earnings. It's all there, in both our names. Morgan touched the paper but didn't pick it up. And if I refuse? If I say that trust, once broken, can't be repaired? Daniel's expression reflected both fear and resolve. Then I'll respect your decision. But I'll still go to London, not to control you or pressure you, but to show you through actions, not words, what you mean to me. What we mean to me. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across their living room, Morgan faced the most important decision of her life. The path to London was clear. The path back to Daniel, or forward with him, was anything but. 6 months later, Morgan stood at the window of her London apartment, watching raindrops trace patterns on the glass. The city sprawled before her, its skyline punctuated by ancient spires and modern towers, a visual representation of tradition, meeting progress that felt oddly appropriate to her current circumstances. Her phone chimed with a familiar tone. Daniel, letting her know he had landed. After months of weekly video calls, separate therapy sessions, and gradually rebuilding, trust through transparent finances and honest communication, today marked a new chapter. Daniel had secured his transfer and was arriving not as a visitor, but as a resident. Morgan's executive position had flourished beyond even Claire's expectations. She had assembled a talented team, secured major accounts, and established herself as a visionary leader. The professional confidence she had temporarily lost during her mother's illness had returned, strengthened by adversity and perspective. As she left to meet Daniel at the airport, Morgan reflected on their journey. The Tao, woman who had quietly said okay to separate finances, now negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts. The man who had once secretly moved assets now shared every financial decision, rebuilding trust one transparent conversation at a time. At the arrival gate, Morgan spotted Daniel before he saw her. He looked both familiar and changed. The same. Features but a more open expression, less guarded. When their eyes met, his face transformed with a smile that reached places that had been closed for years. "Welcome to London," Morgan said as they embraced. Over dinner at a small restaurant near the Thames, they talked about the logistics of sharing her apartment temporarily while looking for a larger place together. But beneath the practical discussion ran a deeper current, the careful reconstruction of partnership based on mutual respect rather than dependency. "I've been thinking about something," Daniel said, setting down his fork. "When I suggested separate finances last year, you said okay in a way that completely threw me." Morgan smiled. "It wasn't the response you expected." "No," Daniel agreed. "I expected anger, hurt, resistance, anything but that calm acceptance. Looking back, I think that moment changed everything." "How so?" Morgan asked. "Your okay wasn't surrender," Daniel said thoughtfully. "It was the beginning of you reclaiming your power. I just didn't recognize it then." Morgan considered his insight. "I think we both needed that moment. You needed to reveal who you'd become, and I needed to see it clearly." As they walked along the riverbank after dinner, the London eye illuminated against the night sky, Daniel took her hand. "I've been meaning to ask. The joint account I reopened before you left, you never added your London salary to it." "No," Morgan confirmed. "I've been maintaining my own accounts." Daniel nodded. "That's fair. I'm just curious. What do you want our financial relationship to look like moving forward?" Morgan had anticipated this question. "I think we need both, joint resources and individual security. Not because we don't trust each other, but because we respect each other's autonomy." They stopped at a viewpoint overlooking the river, the Houses of Parliament glowing in the distance. "I have a proposal," Morgan said, facing him. "Equal contributions to shared expenses and goals. Independent management of our separate investments and retirement accounts, with complete transparency about balances and strategies. Annual reviews of our financial plan together, with a financial advisor as a neutral third party." Daniel smiled. "You've given this serious thought." "I have," Morgan acknowledged, "because I want us to succeed, but not at the expense of either person's security or identity." Daniel considered her words. "Partners, but also individuals." "Exactly," Morgan said. "What we lost wasn't just financial trust. It was the understanding that partnership doesn't mean merging into one entity. It means choosing to walk together, while remaining whole separately." As they returned to her apartment, soon to be theirs, Morgan reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The pain of discovering Daniel's financial separation had forced her to confront uncomfortable truths about their relationship and herself. His subsequent efforts to make amends had revealed a capacity for growth neither had fully recognized. Later that night, as Daniel slept beside her in their bed for the first time in months, Morgan watched the city lights flicker beyond the window. The woman who had quietly said okay to separate finances had transformed that small moment of acceptance into a catalyst for change. That seemingly passive response had actually been the first step toward reclaiming her power and redefining her worth, not just financially, but in every aspect of her life. What had begun as a story of betrayal had evolved into something more complex, a narrative about two people learning that true partnership requires both vulnerability and strength, dependence and independence. Their marriage hadn't been saved so much as recreated, built on a foundation of hard-earned wisdom rather than untested promises. Morgan closed her eyes, thinking of the journey ahead. It wouldn't be perfect. Nothing real ever is. But it would be honest. And that, she had learned, was worth more than any number on a balance sheet.